Hey, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I am the Fat Guy. Most people that I know just call me Brett. I appreciate you listening today. A little bit different episode today. I'm still going to talk about diet, keto, fasting, carbs, all that stuff, weight loss. But primarily going to be putting that in the context of my recent, what I'm going to call a near-death experience. Not one of those where you float off in the ether and you see the bright light or the angels or your loved ones that are gone on before. Not that kind of thing. It was definitely a situation where I'm pretty fortunate to still be here. From all the research that I can find on what happened to me, about a third of the people that have it happen to them, their first symptom is death. So there's no chance to go to the hospital. And then the survivability for the remaining 66%. It's a little bit harder to find information on that. Nevertheless, we'll talk about it. So, what happened? And where am I at now? And how's that affected my eating, fasting, etc.? So, as you know, I've had a broken foot since around May the 20, I think it was May the 26th or May the 28th, I broke my foot. It's interesting because I look back at the pictures and I broke my foot on a Sunday. I decided Monday, it was Sunday afternoon, came home, decided to just wait it out Monday, see how much better it felt. It didn't feel any better, so I called my family doctor. My family doctor saw me on Tuesday. They took some x-rays. He referred me to a bone doctor. And so it was Wednesday before I got a cast. So I had from Sunday to Wednesday before there was a cast put on. And I took pictures every day. So my foot was really swollen. Very swollen those days. Just a very minor amount of a bruised looking color. But basically my foot was pale white like my other foot. 3 weeks later, when they took it out of the cast, my foot was extremely red, purplish, swollen. The toe that I broke, which was the first metatarsal, which is your big toe, actually felt pretty good. The toes that I didn't break hurt really bad, mainly my third and fourth toe, but really my second, third, and fourth toe. But the third and fourth for sure. It's hurt really bad. I asked the doctor about it. That's normal, no problem. They put me in a boot. Wore the boot for 3 weeks, went back. My foot looked just as bad as it did or worse. The doctor had told me when I put the boot on I needed to start walking a little bit on it, just as I could. But not to do a lot on it, but just, start walking on it as I could. When I went back after the end for the 3 weeks of the boot, I told him I still couldn't walk, that I could only put about 60-70% weight on it. I was still using crutches. He's like, well, you're a larger person. I told him I was very concerned about my foot. He assured me everything was fine. It was just going to take a long time for it to correct. And thus began a 16 or 18 week journey. I've lost track at this point. It's 16 or 18 weeks. This foot stays swollen. Red most of the time. Really, really red if I stand up on it or walk around on it. Warm, fevered feeling, all that kind of stuff. And then that led me up into what happened last week. So on Thursday, I decided I was going to go play poker, and I was going to take the RV down to Florida and visit with some family and play some poker and go to a state park and all that kind of stuff. And I noticed that day that I was a little winded. I was just a little winded. But you have to keep in mind that I've been so confined to a bed for so long. I was sick with walking pneumonia for 9 weeks at the beginning of the year. When I ever did get over it, that only lasted 2 weeks. And then I was back sick with it again for another 4 weeks. And for the majority of that whole time, I was mostly in bed. I did get up some. Then I had a little time off. Then I broke the foot, which put me up more. I was just either in the bed or in a recliner or sitting or laying with my foot propped up most of the time. And I'd try to go do things as I could, but the pain was really bad. if you follow me on Facebook, you know my story about that. Finally wound up getting a second opinion from who is supposedly the best bone people in town. They told me the same thing. The foot is fine. It's just going to take it a long time to heal. So, I said all that to say this. I was a little winded on that Thursday, getting ready, getting stuff in the RV to go down to Florida. But I chalked it up to just being deconditioned, just from being so immobile for so long that just conditioned. I just need to get back to walking and moving around and build my conditioning back up. So that night I went to play poker, and as the night progressed, I noticed when I would get up from the poker table to go to the bathroom or to go take a walk, it was very difficult to breathe and feel like I could get oxygen. And my heart rate was through the roof, and I was testing it. I have an Apple Watch, and it has that heart function on it. And standing up, my heartbeat would be like 150, 160, 170. And sitting down, my heart rate would be in the 90s, upper 90s. I finally decided I felt bad enough that I was going to go to the RV. So I went to the state park and got the RV and relaxed or whatever. And eventually fell asleep. And then in the middle of the night, that night, which was late Thursday and early Friday morning, this pain happened in my right thigh that was so excruciating that words could hardly describe it. It was so painful. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And it was so painful that I never could go back to sleep. I did take a bunch of ibuprofen. La-da-da-da-da. The day went on. I tried to move around on it some, but it was so extremely painful. Plus, when I was getting up, I was getting real winded. But by the time the late afternoon, early evening rolled around, I thought I felt a little bit better, and I'd made the trip down there, so I was going to go try to play some poker again. And boy, it was so bad. I was so winded, just sitting at the table. I could barely breathe. My heart rate was really high, and then when I would get up to move around, I just felt like I couldn't get any oxygen at all. My thigh would kill me when I tried to walk on it. And so I guess around 10:30 that night, I got up and was going to make a loop around out the front door, down the balcony and back in and make a big loop. And not only was my thigh killing me, then all of a sudden my lower calf, around where my shin is at, literally I took a step and it felt like that thing had just snapped in half and broke. Like the most excruciating pain shooting through that shin bone ever. That was added to the excruciating pain I was already having in my thigh. And so I stopped walking and picked the leg up, put it down, up, down. I finally finagled it around, up, down, till it got to where I could walk. And I'm like, okay, I got to leave. I don't know what's going on. So I cashed out, went back to the RV, was up most of the night, just short of breath, racing heart, thigh killing me. I did eventually fall asleep some, and we headed back to Dothan. Saturday, I finally fell asleep and slept all day pretty much. And then the Auburn game came on that evening, and I watched the Auburn game. And I had just laid in bed all day. My heart rate laying in bed had finally fallen down to where it was in the mid-70s at that point. And that was laying down. Now, normally for me, I have a low heart rate. My heart rate will be in the mid-50s or something laying down, even around 50 laying down. Sometimes it'll dip in the mid to upper 40s when I'm laying down completely at rest. And it was in the upper 70s to mid-80s, but it had fallen down some. And I fell asleep after the Auburn game went off that Saturday night. And I woke up around 2 in the morning, I guess. And I was having a chest pain. It wasn't severe chest pain. I wasn't even sure it was really heart-related. Nevertheless, it was the thing that put it over the edge for me. And I hopped in my car and went to the emergency room, gasping for air just to walk from my vehicle to the registration desk. I was very lucky that night. I was the only person in the emergency room. There was nobody there. I got there at the perfect time. I think they would have took me on back anyway because of my symptoms, but it didn't come down to them having to decide because there was nobody there, so I went straight back, and that led to tests and EKGs and CAT scans and all that stuff. So nevertheless, the ER doctor comes in, he goes, you got deep vein thrombosis, blood clots in your legs, and pulmonary embolism and blood clots in your lungs. And he's going over all this with me, and I'm like, I'd already suspected that's what it was. I had called my family physician when I was driving to Dothan. I'm very fortunate that I have a physician who's it's kind of a concierge thing, and you have his cell phone number, and you can call him anytime, 24 hours a day. And I'd called him that night. And I told him then, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I have blood clots in my leg, and the way I'm breathing, it's probably going to be blood clots in my lung. I don't know. Anyway, all that turned out to be right. So the emergency room doctor, he's telling me this stuff, and I'm like, well, what's my prognosis, or is it bad? I know there's different types of pulmonary embolisms, and where does mine rank on the scale? And he looked at me, he said, you got the worst one. And he didn't speak good English, this doctor. He said, this is what I heard him to say. You have a soily embolism, he said, or soily or solly or something. And I was trying to write it down on my phone so I could research it, and I was asking him to spell it. He's like, you don't worry. You're when you get to your room, the doctor will tell you or whatever. Anyway, they immediately put me on a bag of heparin, which is a blood thinner, and they immediately went 5,000 units right out of the gate. They told me I'd be getting 1,000 units an hour, and then they'd be taking blood tests, and I was going to go to ICU and all this stuff. But so when I got to ICU, the hospitalist came around, and I asked him about it, and he told me it was a saddle embolism. So a pulmonary embolism is when a blood clot breaks free from your leg, or it could be other places, but usually it's from the leg, from deep vein thrombosis. And it breaks free, and it makes its way back through your veins into your heart or into your lungs. And a saddle pulmonary embolism is, they call it the bifurcation line, but there's these two big, I guess, arteries or veins, I don't know exactly, but they come off the heart and go into the lung. And that's where the blood clot is right there. And it's a really large, vein, artery. I don't know if it's artery or vein. My bad. I should know that. They told me that mine was the largest they'd ever seen. And I'm asking them what's my threat level. And so I had the one doctor that I talked to in the hospital told me, you're going to be fine. We caught it. We're going to put you on blood thinners and you'll make it. The other one told me that it was very serious and that if I made it, I wanted to say, he said 48 or 72 hours. If I made it, then my chances of surviving was good. But he's like, that blood clot is very large and it's in a very large artery or vein or whatever. And he said if it moves and shifts into the lung, it's so large it's just going to completely block everything off. You will have a heart attack and you'll die, and there'll be nothing we can do about it, which was terrifying. Nevertheless, after sometime within the first 24 hours, and they put me in the ICU, and I was in a bed and I couldn't move. They wouldn't let me get up. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I couldn't sit up. I had to lay down. They didn't want me moving around. They said you got to lay as still as possible for 2 or 3 days. But I did start feeling better, and I did start breathing better. And I made the decision. They do that heparin for a while, and then they put you on Coumadin. And Coumadin is something that builds up over time. So you start taking it on day one, it has to build up and reach a saturation level that takes 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days or something. And they have to do a bunch of tests to make sure you get to that level, and then they can send you home. And I'd been studying on these other variants and variations, and I found the only one that they said you could fast on, and I'm big on fasting, and it's called Eliquis. The other benefit of Eliquis is as soon as you take the dose, within an hour or two or whatever, you're at maximum dosage. There's no need to test. It didn't take 3 or 4 or 5 days. And it meant that I'd get out of the hospital earlier if everything else checked out okay. So they put me on the Eliquis, took me off of the heparin, and said they wanted to see how my heart was responding, because there's different levels of embolism. There's I don't remember there's 3 categories. I don't remember how it's announced, but there's the major and medium and minor or whatever. Of course, if you have a saddle embolism, that automatically puts you up to a higher level. But then it boils down to back pressure on your heart. So if you got the big stoppage there slowing the blood down, if it puts a lot of back pressure on your heart, you're at a higher risk. So where I came in to be on the very fortunate side is, just let me say this. Before they decided to let me go, the morning that they decided they were going to let me go, a nurse came in, or radiologist or whatever, with the, whatever you call them, with the ultrasound. And did a very complete, thorough ultrasound of my heart to determine that back pressure, I guess, or how much dysfunction there was in my heart as a result of all this. And while I didn't get the results of that, I assumed since they let me go that mine was on the minor side. I have an appointment with my doctor next week, so I hope to get to find out exactly what that ultrasound showed. But I know from everything else, you don't want your blood pressure to be really high, and you also don't want it to be low. If it falls below 100, people who have pulmonary embolisms and their upper part of their blood pressure, I guess it's the systolic number, the top number, if it's below 100 or below 90, it's a whole nother risk level. And then there's something called what is it, syncope, which is basically passing out and all this. So there's different levels. Well, I never passed out. My blood pressure was pretty much great the whole time. It was just a tad high, what I'd consider high when I got there. I think on the official chart it'd be considered normal. It's like 135/80 or something, or 90. For me, that's high because I usually have pretty great blood pressure. But it fell within their normal range. But once they put me on that heparin, it stayed in the 110 to 120 range over 60 to 70 the whole time. My heart rate came back down and fell down into the upper 40s to mid 50s. And I guess all those factors make it seem like I have a what's called stable. It's more stable. After that, I didn't get much from them, really. They gave me a prescription for the Eliquis. They told me that I need to follow up my family doctor, and that's all that can be done is they put you on the blood thinners, and your body will start absorbing the blood clot. The blood thinners don't do anything to the blood clot. It just keeps you from getting new ones, and it keeps the blood thinned so it flows really smoothly around them and over them to keep them from breaking off, because if another one broke off and went to my heart or my lung, it could kill me, or it could dislodge that one that's already in there, and that could kill me. And so that's the number one priority, is not getting any more blood clots. And all that, they didn't really tell me anything. They didn't tell me how much to move. They didn't tell me should I sleep with my legs elevated. They didn't tell me should I be trying to walk every so often, or should I be waiting to walk. Or I didn't get any information from anybody. And I've been trying to Google it, and the other thing I've been trying to determine is survival rates. Which is kind of a tricky thing to kind of figure out. All I can give you is the rough version based on all the research and studies and papers that I was able to find on it. Considering the one that I have, and considering that all my presentations up to this point have been on the moderate side. In other words, I didn't have the passing out. I didn't have the really low blood pressure or really high blood pressure. I was pretty much considered physiologically stable without anything horrible other than the breathing, and that resolved with blood thinners. So I'm on the better end of it. And so the best I could find is if you survive the first 2 hours after they put you on blood thinners, then your odds of surviving over the next 7 days are very, very, very high. Still, I want to say that it was, God, it was something like 30. Still, it was like 30% of people in the first 7 days or something like that will die. Some crazy number. Then after that, they move you to 30 days, and if you made it to the 30 days, then your percentage goes down of death within the first 30 days. Then your percentage goes down to something. I don't remember what it was. Something in the 20s. And the next number I found, I found this in 2 different studies that said at 4 years after the presentation of a pulmonary embolism, at 4 years later, half of the people who had it were dead. Now that's a scary number. If I'm to believe that number, that means I have a 50-50 shot at being alive 4 years from now. I tried to dig into that research in those papers as well as I could, and it seems like my odds are probably better than that, because from all the people who get pulmonary embolisms, it's a wide range of gamut of people. A lot of them are cancer patients on chemo. A lot of them are people who have hereditary blood clotting issues, which it doesn't seem like that's what I have. It seems like mine was provoked because of an injury and long periods of immobility. It also seems like it's your level of symptom, how symptomatic you are with the blood pressure and the pressure on the left side of the heart and these type things. And I seem to be on the good side of all of those. So the one study that I found, it actually gives you a range that it said the mortality rate is somewhere as high as 50% and as low as less than 1%. Now that's a pretty wide range. And the best I can figure is that range is determined by a lot of factors, but most of them are some of the factors that I have figured on the lower end of, like the syncope and the pressure on the heart and the blood pressure and these type things. So, I mean, it's very... I'm a person that loves researching numbers. I mean, when my mom was diagnosed with cancer, I dove into all the numbers, and I always knew her chances of survival for everything she went through. And you could always find pretty solid numbers on it. But I just can't seem to find solid numbers on this. So it's a bit stressful. I haven't made it to 7 days yet. It started on a Thursday. Yeah, I've made it through the week now. It started on a Thursday night, and I've now made it as of when I'm recording this is Sunday, which is actually making it a week from when I went to the emergency room, 7 days from when I went to the ER, I guess 9 days from when I first had symptoms. So if the research is right, that means I've moved my chances of survival up. Apparently they don't go back and rescan you ever again to see if the blood clots are gone. They just assume that they're leaving. You don't know when they're going to leave. It could be weeks or months, or it could be years, and all this kind of stuff. And when they're reabsorbed, how much is left in the vein varies from it being a small little scar to there could be a lump left there. I mean, all these things. Which brings me to my final discussion, and what I know has been a long and probably for some people boring episode of the podcast, but it brings me to my dietary. So I did a little bit of research. High blood sugars, stuff like that is definitely bad for the blood, definitely bad for things like clotting, etc. So definitely going to be staying keto, low carb. Hopefully mainly keto is going to be the goal. The other thing is I love fasting. That's why I did my research and picked Eliquis, because it's a blood thinner that you can fast with. And if you get past the 24-hour mark with fasting, your body enters into a decent level of what's called autophagy. And that's where your body goes and scavenges for damaged or dead cells, and it repurposes them and eats them and uses up the protein, and then discards the waste. So it's a cleanup process, and this will improve and speed up, theoretically, scientifically, it should speed up and make more efficient my body's process of absorbing these blood clots. So if I can fast and get into autophagy, hopefully my body will scavenge off of those cells in the blood clots, consume the protein, discard the rest, and hopefully I can get them down quicker than if I don't fast. And so that's the plan going forward, is to try to do 24 to 48 hour fasts once or twice a week. And then all the other days do my normal fasting, which is around 23 hours. So I don't eat any food for 23 hours. And I eat one large meal or two medium-sized meals within an hour. And then I'm back to fasting again. It's debatable how much autophagy benefits you get from those short fasts, the 23-hour fast. But I've read some research that says if you stay low carb and you don't have the carbohydrate spike, that you get into autophagy a little bit quicker. So I may be getting some autophagy benefits from the 23-hour fast. I definitely should be getting them once I get past the 36 mark into the 48-hour mark. So that's my goal, is to try to do those. I'll be honest, it's been a week and I haven't hit a 48-hour fast yet. The most I've hit is 23 or 24 hours. I attribute most of that to being in the hospital and having to eat hospital food for several days, because I ordered the diabetic tray from them, which is the lowest carb thing they had, and it was like 70 carbs a meal. I mean, it's ridiculous what they serve diabetics. The hospital and medical profession has no freaking idea how to deal with diabetes. It's so mind-blowing. Like, if they would just tell patients the truth, you would have millions and millions and millions of people coming off insulin and metformin and stuff within a matter of weeks, if the medical profession would quit bullshitting and lying and stuff and say, look, you got type 2 diabetes, you got to stop eating carbs. That's it. Get your carbs down to 20 or lower, maximum 30 or lower, so that and that's it. Anyway, I could rant on that for hours, but I digress. I think we'll end the podcast here. I just want to say on a personal note, so I have hundreds and hundreds of people that subscribe to this podcast for diet, weight loss, fasting, keto advice that don't know me from Adam, don't follow me on Facebook, but I have a lot of people who do. And so I want to speak to those people, specifically the ones that reached out to me. It was so humbling, the number of people that I just only know from Facebook. Lots of them people I've never really met in person, who not just half-heartedly offered, but genuinely offered and nearly insisted on coming to visit me at the hospital, bringing me food if I needed it, clothes if I needed it, or anything that I needed. This is in addition to my family that I have, who obviously looked after me, and some way above and beyond, all of them above and beyond, some of them way above and beyond, which I'm very grateful for. God, I mean, just the number of people just that I strictly know from Facebook that just message me and then would just re-message me and just insist, anything you need, you let me know. I'm 15 minutes from the hospital, or I had several people who work in the hospital, and you know who you are. Thank you guys so much. They were like, "Oh, I work there. It's just no trouble at all for me to bring something if you need it." And it's just overwhelming and so humbling. I learned this from my mom's cancer journey. In the horriblest of times, you get to experience some of the greatest of things. And as much as if I had my choice, my mom would have never had cancer and never died from it. the time, quality time we got together, the talks we had, the depth that our relationship grew to is just beyond anything I could ever have imagined happening under any other set of circumstances. And then I can say from this experience here, just sheer people just being open and willing to just genuinely not use words. And I know sometimes people use words. Hey, if there's anything I can do, let me know. They don't even expect you to contact them, and maybe secretly they're hoping that you don't. No, I'm talking about people that genuinely reached out, wanted to help, and would have went out of their way to help. All I would have had to do was just said the word. Some of them relative strangers, some of them not so much strangers. You know who you are. It meant the world to me. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to shut up talking about that. I hope that I expressed that adequately. Thank you so much for listening. Follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is the username. And if you're not subscribed to the podcast, and this is your first time listening, you can subscribe to wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much. Talk to you next time.